Oh,
But
speaking of publishers, you actually have started up your own, haven't you? Finji.
sort of, kind of on accident. It wasn't. It was originally. Well, I don't know. Like we've done a thing a few times before where folks have
Mm,
wanted to get something out there and they don't have just the infrastructure to do it.
yeah.
And so and we do. It's just kind of laying around from we self-publish.
Yes.
And so occasionally we've been able to sort of like reach out and help another studio, whether it was like porting someone's game or kind of like just setting up and somebody else would do the port, but we would distribute it and just take care of revenue shares on a kind of a monthly basis.
Mm,
Um, and when we sort of kind of gathered up everything that we've been doing for the last 10 years or so and kind of put it under one umbrella and called that umbrella Finji, the goal wasn't originally to do a lot of publishing or distribution. It was just to sort of like um, bring in some of our weird contract work, like work that we did for the Hunger Games or on those weird old Spice games, and then bring in our mobile games, and then bring in our new console and PC games, and kind of like put them under one thing and have this one house that does this sort of work.
mm.
But then our friends started working on Night in the Woods, and they had sort of the same needs that we've seen in the past, where it's like, well, we have to do this thing, but we don't have the infrastructure for it. And then we're like, well, Night in the Woods is beautiful. We'd love to be involved in one way or another. And I think it turns out it's actually been really good for the project. And we've helped facilitate a bunch of things and solve some things, which is cool. And
Mm.
then I don't know. We just started talking to other folks. Panoramical is a project that we've known about and followed for a long time, and we just really wanted it to exist. And it looked like there was like significant risk that if we didn't get involved, that it might not ship.
That's cool. So you have a kind of personal interest really in these sort of these projects. Because I was actually going to ask, how would you go about selecting these particular games? But you've mentioned that one was one that you like the look of that might not have gone ahead, and the other one was a friend's project. Is that a similar thing that you kind of think what might not come out, or how can you help them out a little bit? Because they all look very beautiful and unique games.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be true for a lot of publishers. Any publisher that you should work with, I think,
Mm,
will tend to only take on projects that they're passionate about, because uh, they're way more likely to take care of them and kind of give them their due diligence, but they're also just going to have such an easier time marketing and talking about the game.
mm,
It's really easy for us to, if we're trying to pitch Feist or Panoramical or Night in the Woods to someone, like we don't usually have a lot of, like it's not a thing where we fall back on marketing copy and like a bullet list of features. We're just like, you gotta come over and see it. It's so cool. Look how beautiful it is. And it's like it's coming from a really genuine place. Like these are just projects that we admire a lot, and they're also projects that would benefit from some infrastructure and some support. And whether that's you know taking care of legal documents or taking care of relationships with storefronts or
mm.
lining up ports or um, I don't know, a bunch of weird little tasks. So we don't really run it
Yeah.
as it's not really a for-profit arm of the company right now. And the revenue
Mm.
shares that we take aren't really designed to generate profit for us. It's more like, we think this is a good use of our time. We're helping these beautiful things come out that might not reach as many people if we hadn't gotten involved, and we can take care of the developers, and we can probably break even on most of these titles doing that. um,
Totally. I mean, like I
and
said, I've noticed the theme is that they all have very, very unique, standout art styles, being one of the key things. Looking at all of them individually.
yeah, and sound also, I think.
Mm,
And this is surface stuff that, again, I think is just a reality of commercial game making right now. But if the art and sound stand out, it's going to be a lot easier to um, market the game and talk about the game and show it to people. And it's kind of a shame because like there are um, there are interesting things going on with game design, with storytelling in a lot of games, and if they if the design of the game does not also it is not attentive to the need to surface that stuff, if it's just sort of in there and hidden,
Yeah.
um, it's just going to be harder to reach the audience. And sometimes that hiding of it is the thing that's interesting and important. Like it's somehow essential to the game that there be a secret there. And when that's the case, you can market around that too. But I think when there are beautiful things inside of a game, and it's not necessary that they be hidden, that you wouldn't lose anything by somehow projecting their essence outward to where people can see it, and you don't do that, that um, marketing that later, marketing just being telling people that it exists and getting them to understand what it is and what's interesting about it, and getting people to understand like, hey, this is that game that you've always wanted. It's so much work. It's like
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to do. I think it's something that the game, you have to do press tours and make good trailers and all of that stuff, but somehow underneath all of that, the game needs to be expressing itself. Um, and if it doesn't, you're just kind of up against the wall. So for sure, Feist, Panoramical, which is up for like 3 IGF awards this year, uh,
Yes.
Night in the Woods, and we have a mobile title called Runaway Toad that's coming soon. These are all games that I think are superficially very attractive, but also are superficially pretty unique, and don't always look like a lot of other games. And uh, it sort of makes our job easier, but it's also that they're just sort of doing this one basic requirement of um, kind
Mm.
of projecting their essence or whatever you want to call it. It sounds very like self-helpy, or
It
uh,
makes sense though. Yeah.
like the games have to do more yoga or something.
They just stretch first though, don't they?
Yeah, but I just think it was like it's communication. Like ultimately, on some level, like you are trying to communicate,
Mm.
especially when you're making original games. If you're making a genre piece, I think it's really, really different. If you're
Mm.
making a story heavy role playing game, I think there are models you can fall back on, and you can look at other games' trailers and figure out what to say about your game. And you don't have as much risk about people understanding what your game is because they've played other games. You can say like it's Advance Wars but with unicorns or something, and people can go like, "Oh,
They
I've
get it,
played
don't they?
Advance Wars. Yeah, I know it. I know how that works." Um, and the risk then is that maybe they just go, "Oh, I should go play Advance Wars. I really liked that game." Um,
I guess
uh,
that's where you're hoping the other side of it entices them enough to say, actually, no, I want to play this rather than go back
Yeah.
to the game that
So
they
it's
remind
a
of.
different risk, and for better or for
Mm.
worse, I mean, I think all of our projects fall much more under this other umbrella of like we need to communicate the essence of a new experience, and it's actually really hard to fall back on some kind of existing. Again, even for Overland, saying XCOM meets Oregon Trail is our elevator pitch, but I don't think it. Um,
It does it justice or expresses exactly what you want it to.
Yeah, well, it's not. I would say it does. It's doing its job right now.
Mm.
FTL meets The Walking Dead is like another one sometimes that helps people depending on the audience. They're doing their job,
Mm.
but it's almost impossible for us to mimic the marketing or the self-expression or the essence projection or whatever that those games do. So even
Mm.
though we can use the names of those games to elicit or inspire like the kind of emotional response that we think is appropriate for the game, it's actually really hard for us to look at a game like FTL and say, well, we should do all our marketing like that, because the experience is different enough and the audience and the fantasy are different enough. And it's really, we can't look at XCOM and say, well, we should do our marketing like them, or we should make all the same decisions that they made.
Mm.
Um, it just doesn't work.
No, I guess you don't want to kind of give the false or wrong impression to the audience what the game's
Yeah,
actually going to be about.
yeah. So there's just a lot of, for us, it's like really important that Overland have a bunch of things built in that it uses to tell people what Overland is like.
Mm.
Like we tried to, I think our screenshots look pretty nice, and they're going to keep looking nicer. And
Mm.
that's just a really core, crucial thing. Is like, hey, this game is pretty, and it is way easier to show pretty screenshots like that. That's way more effective to show pretty screenshots than to just say, well, it's very pretty. uh,
Yes,
which is probably
definitely.
obvious, but some people like it's not always, that's not always obvious. Like you can have a game that has really beautiful moments, but it's different when almost every moment has beauty in it. Those are like
Mm.
different things where I think there's a lot of games that occasionally have these really sublime, beautiful moments. Like Grand Theft Auto, occasionally you'll find yourself on a mountain road somewhere and there'll be this vista and it's just devastating. Um, but then you look at something like Firewatch, where, I mean, you can barely, it's really hard without just looking directly at the ground. It's or directly upward. Like almost every other anything that you look at is kind of beautiful.
Yes.
It's like it's challenging to like you have to put real effort into taking a boring, ugly screenshot in that game. You have to like really try. Um,
Yeah, because the whole
and
game itself it exudes beauty.
Yeah, and there's lots of subtle things about you tend to look at beautiful things in the game because they tend to use them as sort of landmarks that help you navigate. And so you're kind of naturally looking to the beautiful things for guidance as you play. So at almost any given point of just noodling around the game and trying to follow the story at all, the screen is just beautiful all the time.
Mm.
And if atmosphere or presentation are some of the things that are essential to the experience of your game, um, you've made it very difficult for people to fail to capture that when they talk about it or present it to other people. And again, like
Yes.
it's tricky because like for a small indie studio and for a lot of game designs, like these aren't, you know, for like a really simple text adventure game that has like a really great hook. Like I'm thinking of like the Warbler's Nest is this
Mm.
really short form, elegant, interesting little text adventure thing. It's not particularly, mind blowing as a piece of interactive fiction in within the interactive fiction community, but I think it's so short, it's so accessible, it's so disturbing ultimately. Um, but uh, it's if you take a screenshot of it, it's just like some small words on a screen, and that's it.
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
really it's if you were going to, and it's a free game, and if you were trying to somehow um, force that to cross over and say like we're going to elevate this and this is going to become a commercial project, um,
Be quite
I
hard
don't.
to market. Well, it'd be a very different marketing strategy.
Yeah, like how do you like what tools would you use to communicate the essence of that game? And it has like a very intense, there's like a crux moment toward the end of the little game that has a very specific feeling. And like what could you do in a trailer that would evoke that atmosphere, or screenshots, or any like what anything would someone see that would evoke that right feeling and entice them to explore this little thing? Like
Mm.
what's the bait that like gets them in, like the honest, authentic thing. And I think for some games it's just way harder than others, and I think that's kind of where you have to kind of draw the line between like, should I spend 2 years of my life building this and hope that I'm going to be financially compensated for that investment at some point, versus like, oh, this game just can't do this. It's too hard. The hill is too high to climb. So it's going to be smaller and more personal and more intimate and maybe less commercial.
Mm. So how hard is it managing this idea of a kind of a micro publishing company then alongside building Overland, which is of course is a as we discussed quite an ambitious game then really.
Oh yeah, it's insane. We just shouldn't be doing it. Well, I mean, my wife Becca, who co-founded Finji and kind of co-founded the other little companies that we've run over the last decade,
Mm,
really does uh, at this point kind of the vast majority of the work that's involved with the publishing arm. So
mm,
all of the paperwork and the upkeep and managing relationships with the platforms and with our developers and all of that stuff is kind of all on her plate. And it's still way too much stuff. Like,
yeah. So I can imagine
uh,
there's a hell of a lot when it comes into just being a micro publisher, let alone building a game like Overland where there's a lot to consider.
yeah, it's deranged. We definitely have bitten off more than we can chew. So like, we backed way off. Like, we're not really soliciting for new publishing projects this year. We're just trying to focus on kind of maintaining and completing the sort of post-launch marketing for the stuff that came out last year,
Yeah.
and to get the games out this year that we want to get out, and then kind of just like sit back and assess and be like, how positive was the impact of our publishing versus how much time did it take versus, did it generate revenue or didn't it?
Mm,
Did we run it at a loss? Was it break even? And kind of take our time into account and the quality of projects that came
mm.
out. Um,
I guess from
but
there, when the Overland's workload maybe becomes a bit easier, you'll then take on more clients.
Yeah, I think that's totally a possible future. And like when our kids are both in grade school, I think that'll change the landscape for us a lot because it really is just kind of me and Becca, and we have a part-time PR consultant now, but we kind of like it being small and hands-on and being like directly connected to people. So I
Mm,
think for me, it's just kind of a question like in the long term, this is one way that we can help other developers is we
mm.
can run this kind of nonprofit publishing arm, and we can hopefully elevate or improve the commercial release of certain types of games. But like, is that the most effective thing that we can do?
Mm,
And so I'm really looking forward to kind of reassessing that in a year or two, and
totally.
just kind of looking at it and going like, is this the coolest thing that we can do, or should we like revisit X, Y, and Z? Should we just like a different thing we could do is just like send someone a check for $10,000 sometimes.
And
Like we
see
could
the
just do
difference.
that, and maybe that will have more net benefits or something. Maybe that'll enable more experimental design as opposed to more commercial design or something. Um, or uh, maybe instead of grants, there's some kind of version of loans. Maybe there's investment like we do with Indie Fund.
Yes.
Uh, there's like residencies, so maybe like cash isn't important, but having access to a mentor and workspace is like the thing that really makes a difference for people. And
I think
maybe
that's quite a big part of it now, especially in a industry that's becoming ever more saturated because, of course, it's easier to make games. Trying to stand
yeah,
out and get your name out there, I think's very important. So by helping other developers out, because you're already well known, it will help them probably more than just flushing cash at them because they might make this game,
yeah,
but then no one would have heard of it.
yeah. So there's some mix of these things, like I don't know. Uh, Basically, we're trying this thing. We're gonna see,
Mm,
and if we feel like the bang for buck for um, not just bang for buck, but like bang for just like time and energy.
of course.
Um, if we feel like it's not really maybe as good as some other things that we could try, then I think we'll try those other things. But um, I don't know. It's a fun.
It's a very
I
interesting
think
experiment in that kind of sense.
Yeah, and I think so far it's working. I think we are making a difference for the teams that we're working with right now. I
Mm,
think it's going to be reflecting in a year or two when we have a little more clear hindsight. Uh, is this optimal? Is this the right thing? Should we, should this be something we do for one game every 2 years and then we devote other resources to other things like residencies or mentorship or,
Mm.
I would love to make another Flixel someday. And that's like a thing that helps a lot of developers.
Yeah.
But it's really weird to kind of quantify or measure or whatever. So I don't know.
Mm. And what's your opinion on things like Kickstarter then over the idea of like publishing? And do you know if the games that you are now kind of helping out have tried Kickstarter?
Yeah, Night in the Woods had a really successful Kickstarter.
Mm.
Um, and for better or for worse, they ran the Kickstarter in the way that I think is the most dangerous. And it's worked out really, really well for Night in the Woods for several reasons
Mm.
that I think a lot of teams don't have access to. But I think the thing that I worry about is um, uh, what's that thing that just the most recent controversial thing was unsung hero or unsung
Oh,
legend or
yeah, that's it.
yeah. Yeah, so it's supposed to be like a cool tactical RPG thing, and you know, game directors um, that I look up to a lot, and musicians from Japan who, um, was it Yasumi Matsuno? I think was like the designer that they tapped because he was the guy who did Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy 12 and like he's just this prolific, brilliant, idiosyncratic designer, and he got attached to this project that didn't pan out, and so
Mm.
like I feel like wow, that was a really crappy thing to do to this brilliant guy, but it's also I think really symptomatic of the way that a lot of Kickstarters run, where this is I think one of the signs that FTL was in good hands is when FTL did their Kickstarter, their game was in beta, so they
Yes, it
knew
was
it
already
was cool. They
quite the way
knew
through.
it
It wasn't a
worked and that the
prototype
game had
in
all
that
of the
sense, was it? It wasn't an
components that
alpha.
they were interested in, and that the
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't a prototype, it wasn't a proof of concept. You can also look at Indivisible is a recent Kickstarter, um, which is really obsessively uh, run in a known genre. Um, so like the number of surprises that they're going to encounter are pretty limited. Um,
Mm.
Koji Igarashi's Kickstarter for his Castlevania style game to me feels like, yeah, there's no prototype for this game, but there's also been like a dozen games just like this. So kind of there is a prototype for that. It's the risks are significantly lower. And I think when you have a Kickstarter that's like, hey, we're doing this weird new thing that nobody's done before, and if you fund the development of this game, then we'll start working on it, is insanity.
Yeah.
Uh, I think on Night in the Woods, that's a little bit what they did, but uh, the art director and artist and co-creator Scott Benson is someone who's been working in film for a very long time, and they really deliberately set out to make a game that was kind of shorter on traditional gameplay and was inspired more by stuff like Gone Home or Kentucky Route Zero. And so the amount of prototyping that was even practical for them to do was pretty limited, and a lot of the success of the game depended on the quality of writing and the subject of the story and the quality of the art. And those are things that they are able to really clearly communicate in the form of a video.
Mm.
So I think in a lot of ways, um, and it's a game of manageable. I say that now, which it's gotten quite large, but it's a game of slightly more manageable size. They're not trying to launch a AAA project or a a massive thing where the success of the game depends on do all of these different disparate mechanics, fit together perfectly.
Mm.
So I think, I mean, I think crowdfunding is amazing. I just think if you look at how board games do crowdfunding, where they um, really cheaply work on a prototype for like a year or two, and then they
Yeah.
take it to Kickstarter to fund the polishing, completion, and distribution of the game.
Mm.
That is way less terrifying to me.
Yeah, it makes sense because they've already refined it, haven't they? Technically, it's just making it look good. And I guess games for marketing maybe would be a very good way of doing Kickstarter, where they've almost finished the game, but they need that push to get it noticed, and using Kickstarter for that.
Yep, yep. And if you're making the kind of game that benefits a lot from having a bunch of players play it before launch, for
Mm.
balancing and feedback and stuff like that, it feeds
Yeah,
into that. So I think for the right games that have taken the right development approach, to me, it seems like it just makes a ton of sense. It's
mm.
supporting all these needs that the project might have, but yeah, the sort of, I guess I would say like the sort of normal way that it's done makes me like what feels like the normal way to do it to me, which is like selling a dream and then building it and hoping it doesn't turn out super bad.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I wouldn't do that. We don't do that.
yeah,
Like we didn't invest in Overland until we worked on a prototype for 6 months and proved out all the basic gameplay. Like there was 6 months of Overland where we only invested about $10,000 in it.
yeah.
Um, and that was
Just to
in
make sure it
stages. That
works.
was like every 2 months investing a little bit more money to take the prototype a little bit farther because it hasn't set off any, alarms. And we didn't start really investing in it until, we could give it to a stranger, explain a couple of rules, and they could sit and play the game for like an hour and a half or something,
Yeah,
with a fraction of its final feature set. And at that point, we are like, okay, I think we're onto something. I think we have something special. Um,
definitely. It's a very good way of kind of refining the game down and making sure you don't invest all your time and money into a project that might not be worth it.
Yeah, well, and this was especially strong on us because we just come off of a game where we didn't prototype quite diligently enough, and we like the horse got in front of the cart a little bit, and we ended up kind of freezing a project that we'd been working on for about 9 months.
Yeah.
Which, when you run your own studio and you have kids and stuff, like, um, I mean, those things are you're gonna occasionally, you know, make judgment calls that don't stand up over time, but um, you have to put the work in to avoid it. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's far too costly otherwise. It's like for me, it's like, oh, we weren't super diligent about our prototype, and now like my kids can't afford swim lessons anymore, or whatever. Like um, there are these just stakes for me that feel way higher than they used to. So
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. But yeah, I think there's that version of crowdfunding I think can be really, really good, where like you've done the work, you are on to something, or
Mm.
you're very, very confident that there's prior art in the field that has paved the way for what you're doing. Um, you
Totally.
know,
And
but then
so
there's the
where?
whole thing where like Kickstarter amounts are wildly out of sync with the actual production cost of a game.
Yeah.
And that I think is real weird for the future of crowdfunding, for educating consumers about what it costs to do this and how much time and energy it takes to make a game. These
Yes. Like when.
Kickstarters where they're like, we raised $60,000 and a publisher gave us 6 million. Uh, it's like
Yeah.
that's a message that even when they're upfront about it, I think tends to get lost, and people tend to developers and consumers tend to conflate certain types of output quality with certain budgets. And I think there's a reason that games like The Witness or games like Firewatch, part of the reason that those games look like they do is because of the development budget of the game. They can afford a team and they can afford to take their time and iterate. And I think if you make a little video on Kickstarter that implies the kind of quality that you should expect from a, for better or for worse, $10 million game, and your Kickstarter is trying to raise $100,000. Uh, Something about that feels weird. Like I just don't think that can possibly be good in the long run. It just doesn't. Something about it seems dishonest or something.
Yeah, and you get a lot of those projects that kind of fall short. I think there was Ant Simulator fell short for a similar sort of reason.
Yeah, and I mean these things. Yeah, well, and these things are hard. Like our overland budgeting was way off also, but you know that's on us. You know, there's no crowdsourcers taking the fall for that. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah, there seems to be a weird trend on Kickstarter in which a Kickstarter will aim low and hope that they can get their stretch goals up high enough to actually reach the target that they originally have. And the reason why they go for such a low like benchmark is so they can uh, attract enough people into it. It's weird. It's so weird because like they try and like they think if they can like target like say like something like it'll only take us 10k to make this project happen when really it's a possible like 50k to even get this off the ground. But they'll just hope that they'll hit their stretch goals, which is really weird because it's like counterintuitive to how like actual like loans and grants work, in which like they'll ask you to actually overestimate, so like you can predict or like hopefully like prevent any like major disasters or like get ahead of yourself. It's weird.
Yeah, well, and even then, like games like any other large scale project are super notorious for being about 2.5 times uh, over scope and over budget. And some of those things are mistakes, but some of those things are just this tendency for. I mean, I think the thing about good design is you can't do it all up front. Like good design is always going to be reactive and self-reflective. Like there are always going to be scope changes. You're always going to start building your game and then discovering partway through that, oh, this piece that we thought was really important actually isn't important, but there are these two other things that that if we don't do, we're going to feel like we just wasted the last 2 or 3 years of our lives or the last year of our life or whatever. Like we really, if we don't put these things in, we are just this game isn't going to be what it should be. uh, and I think that's a totally natural thing. And then that's when you have to make these like gnarly kind of judgment calls as a designer, as a producer, or whatever. Like, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Do we should we make this additional investment in order to bring this game up to the level that it is? And I think a lot of the time, the more invested in a game you are, the more money you've put in, the more sunk costs there is, the more time and like emotional investment that you have, the harder it is to compromise on the ship quality. When you see partway through the game what it could be, and you realize the kind of thing that you could be shipping, um,
You want to create
being
that, don't you? You don't want to kind of settle for second best if you've worked this hard already.
yeah, exactly. And because it's going to it changes the risk profile a lot. Like even if you spend twice as much money making the game turn out exactly the way you wanted it to, um, that increase in final quality might mean a 0 times or like a 1x multiplier on profit, or it might mean a 100x multiplier because you finally like you found some essential thing that everybody's been waiting for. um, and I think it's just a really hard I think it's a really hard call to make, and I don't think it excuses bad production and bad scheduling or bad budgeting. And I really don't like the tendency for bad producers to pass the buck and just, force people to crunch for 2 years in order to hit really unrealistic ship deadlines within the budget and time that they have. Um, I don't like that's clearly evil. Like, there's nothing
Yeah.
about that is okay. That's just saying like, oh, well, we want our cake and we want to eat it too, and you guys stay here. I'm off to play golf this weekend.
It's a bit like
Um,
the Rayman incident, isn't it? Is it Rayman Legends that the team was forced to work over Christmas time to get it out for a Wii U launch in like January, and then they changed their mind, didn't they? Ubisoft. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we've had. I mean, Austin AAA was really AAA development in Texas, and especially in Austin. I think it was typically just a death march. You'd work on the game, all-consuming, life-destroying commitment to a game for 2 years, and then the studio closes because the game doesn't do very well because you death marched people for 2 years making something because you scheduled badly and didn't do enough pre-production. Like, that's a way that things were done in Austin for a long time. And like that's obviously not okay. So I just like there's this is this honesty thing or this authenticity thing about like being honest about budgets, being honest about the kind of exploratory consequences of making a game that diverges from known genres at all. You know, the notion that you're like, well, it's like this game, but we changed X, Y, and Z. Well, as soon as you change those three things, everything else in the game needs to compensate for those changes. So like you're almost never changing two things if you are designing diligently and you're doing this thing where you design with consideration or whatever. You are always having to go through and rebalance and readjust and reassess the necessity and utility of everything else in the entire game. And you're automatically back to this place where you're like, well, it's mostly an RPG. We just blah, blah, blah. And if you are doing that seriously and you're taking that seriously and you're trying to do a good job, that little change means kind of reassessing everything from the ground up to make sure that those changes are supported and that they're integral. And that stuff, like, that's just expensive. It's like, you know, in other industries, like you call this like this is like R&D cost, right? You're like, oh, we're gonna make this new thing, but it's like significantly, it varies significantly from the previous generation of thing, and so we need to put a few years of R&D in to make sure that everything works together, and that when somebody gets into this new electric car, it won't just like burst into flame right away, right?
yeah.
Like, and I think there's this notion that because that like perceived proximity to an existing genre sometimes somehow like invalidates the need for like a lengthy sort of R&D component of development that just feels very common. It feels very broadly accepted, like and I think it's insane. Like, it can't be done. You either make a bad game, or you ruin everybody's lives who's working on it, or you don't ship, or whatever. Like, there's no version of it that's good.
No. Well, of course, not shipping, of course, is probably the worst one because all that time and effort never gets seen.
It's pretty bad. It's a pretty
Yeah.
bad one. And I don't know if any of them are really, really ideal. So like, I don't know. There's some kind of tightrope thing in the middle with flexibility and keeping an open mind and being honest about budgets and demands, and that sometimes you're going to explore something that's a dead end, but that's how exploring works. And having all those things kind of come together, but it feels like I don't know. It's difficult. That's for sure.
Definitely. Well, Adam, it's been fantastic speaking to yourself. Where can people find out about your latest projects in like Overland and Finji?
Oh, easiest thing is just go to finji.co, and all the stuff is on there, and you can find out what shows we're going to go to and what games are coming out or have come out, and there'll be links to our Twitter accounts and email addresses and all that good stuff. Just finji.co.
Fantastic. And when will people be able to get a chance of testing, or the beta testing of Overland?
Pretty soon. Last month we were saying that it would happen last month. This month we're saying that it will happen this month.
Ooh, fingers crossed then.
Yeah, hopefully we're more writer this time.
Well, it's been an
But that's
absolute
how it
pleasure.
goes. Thank you guys. This is great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
sure thing. My pleasure. And apologies as always for lengthy tangents that probably weren't even asked about.
No, they were really, really interesting. No, it was really, really cool actually seeing like your view on like the industry at the moment, and also I really love the way that you hire people. I just wish that the other industries and other companies would have the same mentality.
I think it would be interesting to see the kinds of games that got made if there was more blind hiring and people were looking for different kinds of experience. I think the kinds of
Mm,
games that would get made would end up changing. Even even taking into account the sort of the bureaucracy of AAA game production, I still think that things would shift and change. I think you see that at um, like Dragon Age is probably a pretty good example of a game that's kind of happening within a genre, but I think their hiring practices and studio culture tend to produce relatively diverse teams. And I think
yeah,
the kinds of stories they tell reflect that. I think it's
definitely.
really one to one, like obvious parallel. So yeah, I would be real happy to see a little bit more of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear you talk about like how through hiring for development and taking on publishing, that you've got a very similar idea for both of them, in which that you've been hiring people that you believe to have a strong collaboration with, and you're willing to teach them the skills that they need, in which you've done the same for in your publishing. In your publishing branch, in which you've been taking on projects in which they need help in aspects that you already know about, and you're willing to help nurture their idea to and get their project to the end goal, and make sure that they can stay true to the project while also making sure that all the paperwork's in order. It's very interesting to see that you're willing to that your development and your publishing have got this like strong idea of strong thought of teaching, and willing to take fresh new ideas on and take fresh eyes onto a project, rather than relying on safe bets or the experience of a person. And it's been interesting to hear you. It's been interesting to hear the fact that there's that similarity between the two.
Yeah, it's I guess my closing thought there would be like we were talking earlier about like 9 to 5ers or whatever, um and like I used to 9 to 5 at a software company, and I actually found it like really satisfying, and I appreciated this like delineation between work time and personal time, and I got to do really satisfying work. Like I got to just go do a good job somewhere, and someone took care of me while I did that, and it was pretty excellent. Um, but the thing is, that situation, while it seems more stable, isn't always. People get laid off, company focuses change. The thing that happened to me there is I ended up losing autonomy over our ship quality. So I used to have a lot of control over how good our shipped work was, and various
Mm,
circumstances conspired to produce a situation where I had to ship what I considered to be substandard work. I think what everyone at the company considered to be substandard work.
yeah,
And that started to feel you know, like it couldn't add up. Like there was no amount of money that I could be paid to do that where I would feel like I was spending my life in a acceptable way, or
yeah,
a way that I idealized or valued, and started looking into ways that we could, have more control over our output quality and over the projects that we worked on. And that's kind of freelancing and contracting came out of that. but it's like, if what we've found, from real experience in running our own company, is if you're not working on something that you're really passionate about, the overhead and the risks and the stress and responsibility that all come with running a company, um, it starts to just not make any sense. When we would do a contract for someone, and it would turn out that they were secretly a pretty bad client, and they were going to interfere and prevent us from shipping at the level of quality that we valued. um, Even if the pay was very good, suddenly it was back like having that desk job.
Yeah, that makes sense
Except it
totally.
had all these other risks. Like, I wasn't getting great health insurance from a corporate insurance thing. So it was like all the bad parts. It was like the worst of both worlds suddenly. So, I think, whether you're doing freelance work or contract work, or quote unquote original IP, or doing ports or whatever, positioning yourself so that eventually you have some autonomy and control over the quality of thing that you put out is sort of, it feels like the sort of the trump card in a lot of ways. Like, it kind of tops everything, independent work or otherwise. um, and I think that's part of that's one of I think it's the thing that's driving a lot of these sort of mirrored practices, or decisions that seem like they're being made in a similar way. Is, if we make a game, say like contract work, freelance work, like, you want to do what the client says that you get your money. But you also want to do good work, because that way you can put it in your portfolio to bring in new clients down the road. So there's
Totally.
kind of a short-term versus long-term trade-off there. When you're making your own games and self-publishing, uh, there's this whole other different thing going on where, um, you know, there's no client to make happy to make sure that you get paid. You just might get $0.
Yes, you should make sure that the work you produce you're happy with. So at the end of the day, if it doesn't go anywhere, at least you're happy with the product itself.
It's the only thing. Like, it's the only thing that you have a modicum of control over, is whether or not you made a thing that you're pretty happy with.
Mm.
So, um, that, like I said, we've been doing this for a long time, like 10 years or something, and that's really kind of the only thing that stands out, is like, save up a bunch of money, spend it making something you're really proud of and passionate about. And, um, the way that you get to make more things is to have good freelance clients, or make the right calls about what you decide to really invest in and try to commercialize, when it comes to your own IP.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, if you are doing this to try to like make some money, and you don't really care about the quality of what you're putting out, like, there are a lot of jobs in the world where you can go make stuff that you don't care about and get paid to do it. And most of them are easier than this. This is a
Yes.
really hard way to do that.
Yeah. All risk. Well, on that note, Al, shall we say awkwardly goodbye? Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah. I love the awkward goodbyes.